All right, let's dive right in. We are about to step into what feels like a divine courtroom, where the prophet Ezekiel is laying out a legal case from God against an entire nation. The charge is betrayal. The verdict is, well, it's shocking. And the executioners? That's the most stunning twist of all.
So this brings us to the central, really unsettling question at the heart of Ezekiel chapter 16. It's a question about trust, about betrayal, and about a kind of brutal irony that a nation is about to come face to face with.
Okay, so picture this. The scene is set for a divine trial. The prophet Ezekiel steps into the role of the prosecution. And he's not just making an emotional appeal, he's presenting a formal, legal case from God against the city of Jerusalem. The court is now in session.
Now, God says this one word, wherefore. You might just read past it, but in this context, it is huge. It's a legal term. It basically means because of all the evidence I just laid out. It signals that the time for arguments is over. Now, it's time to hear the sentence.
And when you hear that word harlot, you probably think it's just a nasty insult, right? But that's not what's happening here. In this divine courtroom, it's a specific legal charge. It means Jerusalem has broken a sacred, binding contract, its marriage covenant with God. It's an accusation of profound betrayal.
So before any sentence gets handed down, you've got to read the charges. And God, acting as the judge here, lays out the indictment against the nation with just devastating clarity.
It really boils down to three core charges. First, public idolatry. This wasn't something hidden anymore. It was out in the open, celebrated. Second, shameless political alliances with pagan nations, which meant compromising their faith and exposing their unfaithfulness. And third, and this one is just horrific, the charge of state-sponsored child sacrifice.
And look, these weren't just some vague general complaints. That charge of child sacrifice was pointing a finger at a very specific and very dark chapter in Judah's history, the reign of King Manasseh. During his rule, this horrific practice wasn't just overlooked, it became state-sanctioned murder, a complete and total betrayal of God's law.
Okay, so all of this, all these charges, they're building to this one central, deeply ironic twist. This is where the whole story just flips on its head.
So get this. God declares that he himself will gather Judah's lovers, the very nation she cozied up to and trusted for protection, like Egypt and Babylon. But he doesn't stop there. He says he will also gather all the nations she hated, and he's going to unite them all for one single purpose, to execute judgment against her. Now, you might be thinking, wow, this sounds incredibly harsh. But this isn't some random act of divine rage. God is actually acting as a judge, applying the law. He says Jerusalem will be judged as women that break wedlock and shed blood are judged. And under their very own law, the Mosaic Law, the penalty for both adultery and murder was death. So the sentence, as severe as it is, fits the crimes.
So, the verdict has been read, the sentence has been passed, and what comes next is the historical record of its brutal, systematic execution. The prophecy paints this picture of just total public humiliation. All the things Judah took so much pride in, her wealth, her status, her beautiful religious sites, all of it will be violently torn away. She'll be left exposed and shamed for the whole world to see. And this wasn't some far-off, maybe one-day prediction. It happened. The year was 586 BC. That's when King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army broke through the walls of Jerusalem, and the kingdom of Judah came to an end.
And when you look at what the Babylonians actually did, it's like a checklist of Ezekiel's prophecy. They acted as the executioner, they stripped the temple of its treasures, smashed the altars, burned the city to the ground, and dragged the people off into exile. The very things Judah once gave away willingly to its lovers were now taken from them violently.
But you have to ask, right? What was the ultimate point of all this devastation? Was it just about destruction? Well, believe it or not, the text itself gives us a surprising answer. This judgment, as terrible as it was, had a very clear purpose. The goal wasn't endless anger. It was to satisfy justice so that God's fury could finally rest. The whole point was to purify, to break the cycle of rebellion. It's a strange concept, but it's almost like a severe mercy, a painful, surgical intervention designed to stop a cancer that compassion alone had failed to cure.
And when you dig all the way down to the absolute root of the problem, you find something so simple it's almost stunning: forgetfulness. Judah had forgotten the incredible grace they were shown when they were just a young nation. They forgot the covenant.
And what this story shows us is that forgetting mercy is the very first step toward rebellion.
But here's the really chilling part. This story, this horrifying pattern of trusted neighbors becoming hostile executioners, it didn't just end with Babylon. It seems to be a timeless warning that just keeps echoing down through the ages.
You see it again and again. Centuries after Babylon, Rome, another world power, does the same thing, destroying the Second Temple in AD 70. Fast forward to 1492, and Spain, after centuries of relative coexistence, violently expels its entire Jewish population. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Russian Empire, once a place of refuge, becomes the site of horrific pogroms. And then, most horrifically, in the 20th century, Germany, one of the most sophisticated nations in Europe, perpetrates the Holocaust. In every single case, nations once seen as allies, or at least as home, turned into executioners, fulfilling this ancient, tragic pattern.
So, what's the big takeaway from Ezekiel 16? It's a relentless and sobering truth. Alliances that are built on human power and fear, instead of on trusting God, are almost designed to end in betrayal. God doesn't need to invent a new punishment. He simply lets his people face the consequences of trusting in the very powers they chose over him.
And all of this leaves us with a question for right now. If Judah's entire downward spiral began with simply forgetting the grace they were shown, we have to ask ourselves, what foundational truths, what vital mercies are we in danger of forgetting today?